Most croissants you'll come across aren't that good. They're basically just glorified crescent-shaped dinner rolls. But to get a better sense of how good croissants can be, I decided to try some from local fancy bakeries in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah. They were definitely a big step up. Very airy and crisp. One of them was so amazing that it literally left me speechless. Layers of flavor, the crust so delicate that it completely shatters when you bite into it. How does this happen? Croissants at their simplest are just an enriched dough which is then chilled and rolled out with butter layered in. But comparing recipes, we see that there's not an exact formula. Here's how 18 recipes compare with each other. Different proportions of ingredients. Some use milk or water or a combination for the dough. Some mix in lots of butter with it, others don't use any. Bread flour is popular, though all-purpose is common too, or sometimes a combination. Some only do a few minutes of kneading, some call for 10 minutes or more. Most rest the dough in the fridge before using, others just do a room temperature rise until doubled. The butter folded in can be as little as 25% the weight of the dough, or up to 45%. Some say to wait 90 minutes between each folding, while others do it all at once with no resting. Very strong opinions on the number of layers you need. Baking temperature and time is highly variable. Some change the temperature mid-bake, some use steam or convection. Why all these differences? Partly because croissants aren't just one thing, as you can see from my stunned reaction. Some are meant to be bready and sturdy and used for sandwiches, and others are more of a delicate snack pastry. Can I make croissants this good at home? Probably not. Still, I wanted to know why recipes recommended certain things, so I've done some research and experiments. For example, why does it matter what butter you use? Fresh, creamery butter. Is there anything more comforting? Most recipes call for fancy butter that's pliable, European butter as we'd call it in the United States, but could you use cheaper butter instead? Let's find out. First up is fancy plugra, followed by generic grocery store brand. The cheaper butter did actually seem pretty nice and pliable. And since they say butter with more fat is better, I was curious if you could clarify the cheaper butter, melt and boil it to evaporate some of the water, and laminate that. Good in theory, in reality, not so much. The clarified butter definitely didn't have a spreadable texture and just crumbled to pieces while laminating. In the end, the cheap butter worked surprisingly well, even made a nice honeycomb. But there was a flavor difference. The cheap butter just tastes cheap, you can tell. Conclusion, buy the fancy butter. Not only does it taste better, but it should also have a bigger window of temperatures where it's pliable, on the cooler end especially. Most recipes call for European butter, citing that it has more fat and less water content. 82% minimum butter fat compared to 80% in American butter. Does that extra 2% fat really make it that much smoother? If it were just about fat versus water content, then my clarified butter with nearly all fat should have been super smooth instead of shattering like it did. Truth is, there's way more to butter than just fat percent. Exhibit A, plugra. Exhibit B, Kerrygold. Both 82% fat. Cold out of the fridge, a half-inch thick slice of plugra is just barely pliable, but a slice of Kerrygold is immediately softer and bends quite a lot. The quality of the cream and the churning process make a big difference. This super nerdy page explains how the process works. There's a lot to it. If you've ever melted and tempered chocolate, for example, you know you try to hit target temperatures to form the right fat crystals. Same thing with butter, and that's probably why my clarified butter turned out like this. It wasn't the right crystal structure. Softer butter would need to be kept colder when working with it, and would pair well with a dough that is also softer. And how soft the dough is depends partly on your flour. What flour should you use? This topic is so deep that it deserved its own video. In short, use whatever the recipe calls for, with the caveat that like butter, not all flour is created equal. How much should you knead the dough? To test this, I kneaded this dough in the stand mixer for 5 minutes. It was still pretty rough at this point. This one I let go for 12 minutes, making a decent window pane, but still tearing a bit. And this one kneaded for over 20 minutes until it had so much gluten that I could probably make a thin crust pizza with it. The 5-minute dough was soft and rolled out easily. The 20-minute dough was very stiff by comparison. But does the easier rolling of less developed gluten come at the cost of structure in the final product? To a certain degree, yes. I do see a better structure and rise with the doughs that were kneaded more. In a separate test, I used some French T55 flour, kneaded very minimally, and it came out super flat like this. You are what the French call les incompetents. Fancy bakeries can get away with kneading more at the start because their sheeting machines roll out perfectly with minimal pressure, and that's probably part of why it's so hard to make good croissants at home. But this is where knowing the why helps so much. You know how kneading by hand requires you to stretch the dough and flip it on itself, turn it 90 degrees, and repeat? That's exactly the same motion as the folding process. Lamination is kneading. You use a moderately kneaded dough at first, so that by the time you're done folding and rolling, then it has good developed gluten. If you knead too much from the start, the dough becomes tough. The 20-minute kneaded dough was so stiff that my wrists hurt after rolling it out, and it didn't seem to rise any better than the 12-minute knead, which seemed like a good compromise. Recipes usually call for resting the dough in the fridge overnight, but some have you rest on the counter first for a bulk fermentation for about an hour to help activate yeast or develop some flavor. Do you need to do that? I let one dill rest an hour before chilling versus the other with no rest, straight into the fridge. I didn't notice much difference in the end. I suspect it has a minor effect on flavor. Maybe it's more important if you're not using instant yeast, but this initial rest doesn't seem critical. You can probably skip it. Some recipes call for a full rise to double volume at room temperature after mixing as an alternative to the overnight rest. I also tried that, and it results in similar flavor. If you want to make croissants from start to finish in one day, this shortcut works out okay. Most recipes call for resting the dough for about an hour between folds, but some do all folding at once with no resting, and they seem to get good results. It reminds me of puff pastry. Similar to croissants, it's a butter laminated dough that you ideally roll and chill in multiple stages, yet there are recipes for shortcut or blitz puff pastry, where you fold in grated butter all at once. Puff pastry doesn't have yeast, which does need time to develop flavor in a dough, but out of curiosity, I did try making blitz croissants, where I made a dough and immediately laminated it with grated butter. It actually comes out with a decent texture and honeycomb, but the flavor isn't there. It kinda just tastes like flour. You for sure need to give the dough a fridge rest overnight or the full doubled room temperature rise to develop the flavor. But when you get to folding, again, the why is important. You rest the dough between folds, either if it's stiff and resisting you, resting relaxes the gluten, or a cool chill helps the butter firm up if it's getting too soft. If your butter is still spreadable and the dough is still extensible, you can do multiple folds at once. How many layers do you need? Layering is either done with letter folds into thirds, or sometimes a book fold into quarters. There's this awesome website where you can plug in various folding patterns and see how many layers result. 55 layers is classic, which is butter encased plus 3 letter folds. But what difference does the number of layers make? 5 layers total for this one. Smells really good. Let's take a bite. Fine roll, but sure, 'tis no croissant. 9 layers total. Let's see what the texture is. The inside is just a little thicker and firmer and more substantial than I would like. 17 layers now. We're starting to get a honeycomb texture. It wants to be a croissant, but it's not quite yet. Fold it over once more to 33 layers. Now we're getting somewhere. This one is definitely the first one that actually tastes like a croissant. Now this one was folded over once more to 55 layers. More layers makes for a nicer texture up to a certain point. It depends on how thin you roll the sheet out before cutting and how much rise you get while baking, so it's tricky to get just the right honeycomb you're looking for. How long should shaped croissants proof before baking? This first one was baked after 40 minutes of proofing, and each one after 40 minutes later. Pardon my terrible lamination on these, yeesh, but we can see it gets decent volume at 2 hours in, and 2 hours 40 minutes is even better. Because croissants need to proof at a cooler temperature to avoid any chance of butter melting, it takes a while, at least 2 hours. You cannot shortcut this. What temperature should you bake them at, and for how long? Cooking time will depend on the size of your croissants. While most call for cutting triangles around 4 by 10 inches, they vary in how thick the dough should be. Some roll it out to 1/4 of an inch, others say 1/8 of an inch, or in metric about 3 to 5 millimeters. I was surprised how 2 triangles of similar size I would cut would sometimes be very different weight, off by 20% or more, so it helps to weigh them for consistency. 90 to 100 grams is a good target. Most recipes bake at 350 to 400 degrees, but sometimes call for preheating the oven a bit higher and lowering the temp partway through the bake. I wanted to make sure I was measuring temperature accurately, so I tested my oven with a fancy app that tracks the temperature over time, and it shows how my main oven, set to 350, cycles between 340 and up to 420, and that was with convection on. Without convection, it was a bit lower, 335 to 380. Hence the recommendation to use lower temperature if you're using convection, where the circulating air heats more efficiently. Some say a baking stone at the bottom of the oven can help stabilize temperature, and in my test it does seem to help. The cycles were shorter and less dramatic with it, though it may have had more to do with the stone diffusing the heat from the heating element on the bottom. This website shows how the effect of a baking stone's extra mass is actually pretty minimal in stabilizing oven temperatures. I'll have to dig more into this later. My toaster oven, on the other hand, was actually way more accurate. When set to 350, with convection it's 340 to 350, and without convection it was 350 to 360. My compliments to Breville, you made an awesome toaster oven. But the takeaway is, not all ovens are created equal. Don't trust your dial. Anyway, here are croissants baked at a consistent 400 degrees for 20 minutes, these ones at 350 for 30 minutes, and these ones I started at 400 for the first 10 minutes and then dropped to 325 for 15 more minutes. These all came out really nice and evenly brown. The texture of the ones baked at the lower temperatures was actually a bit more crumbly and pleasant, and the hotter temperature can sometimes burn the tops too much like this, so I like the more moderate temperatures. And it turns out that filming time lapses of the baking process is useful. It revealed that a lot of my croissants tended to rise well, but then collapse before they were done. Google tells me that might be exhausted yeast if the dough is overproofed, or it could be that the baking temp isn't hot enough for the outside to set up firm after it rises. So it does seem that starting at 400 and then dropping makes a lot of sense. 400 gives you the good oven spring and sets the crust at its peak size. Then you lower the temperature to gently toast and finish cooking. Most recipes call for brushing with an egg wash to get a shiny brown crust, and they tell you to brush only the tops and not the exposed layers on the sides, otherwise they'll fuse together and it won't rise as well. In a lot of videos I've actually seen bakeries spray their croissants with egg wash, so I'm suspicious if it really matters that much. These ones I just brushed on the tops, these ones I brushed all over, and they both rose well and looked about the same on the inside. Didn't seem to make a difference. A few days later, I made this croissant that got excellent volume, my best one yet, and this one was egg washed all over. So I call shenanigans on this. It's not a big deal if the egg wash drips onto the sides. Professional ovens use steam injection. It helps the dough stay moist so it expands well. At home, we can use a pan of hot water to add steam, but does that actually make a difference? Here are croissants baked with no steam, and these I baked with a pan of steamy water. And for a third comparison, I covered these croissants for the first 10 minutes of baking, hoping that traps some steam of its own. I didn't see any obvious improvement with either the steam pan or being covered. The no steam bake had the nicest crumb of them all, so I'd say steam is optional at best. But I don't know, maybe steam works better if you change up the temperature? There are so many variables. As much effort as I've put in here, I can't say anything definitively. While I did my darndest to test only one variable at a time, if you want to perfect your recipe, you'd ultimately need to test variables in combination with each other. Test 3 different flours with different kneading times and folding styles and baking times. There are hundreds of variations. After each new experiment, I immediately wanted to go back and redo the old ones with what I'd learned. And in many cases I did. What you saw was my second or third attempt. Even professional bakers take months to perfect their recipes. While it's fun to be nerdy and obsess over variables, I did all of this testing so that hopefully you don't have to. Croissants seem pretty complex, and they are. At home, we might not have the same butter or equipment as professionals do, but we do have a luxury in that what we make doesn't have to be perfect. I learned to enjoy my mistakes and eat them along the way. Even the ones that didn't turn out right still tasted really good. If you're not after perfection, if you just want to make decent croissants, I think that's actually easier than it's made out to be. You may not think so given everything I showed in this video, but the recipes are flexible. Once you understand the why, you'll know how to make them work. Check out the video description for recommended recipes to try, and also for links to my graphs and testing spreadsheets, which reveal my totally haphazard methods for tracking all of this.